The humble audio interface. These come with 1 input, 2 inputs, 4 inputs, 6 inputs, 8 inputs, 16 inputs. How on earth do you decide how many inputs you need before you shell out your hard-earned cash? Hello, home music creators. How many inputs you need on an audio interface, unsurprisingly, depends on exactly what you want to do with it. In this video, I'll talk through various different scenarios and setups, each with different requirements for the number of audio interface inputs. This can potentially save you money, because the more inputs your audio interface has, the more expensive it will usually be. So you should only buy as many inputs as you need to keep the cost of your home studio down. First thing I'm going to start by talking about is recording live versus recording a track at a time. Now, it doesn't matter how many instruments you are recording, if you only ever record one at a time, you only need one input on your audio interface. And this is fundamentally what multi-track recording in a DAW, a digital audio workstation, allows us to do. You record one track, then you record another track over the top of that, then another one over the top of that, and etc. until you build up all the tracks in your song. And I think that's what most of us do in our home studios. Certainly that's what I do in this room here. Now, recording a band live means you are recording instruments at the same time, and you need at least one input per instrument you are recording. So for example, say we had a band with drums, bass, 2 guitars and a singer. We'd need an input for the singer's microphone, we'd need an input each for the 2 guitars, an input for the bass guitar, and at least one input for the drum kit, although more likely we'd be using multiple microphones on the drum kit, so we'd need more than that. So we need an absolute minimum of 5. Now you could argue that, well, hold on a minute, why don't you just use one microphone and just put it in the middle of the room and all the sound can go into that? You can do that. The drawback of that is you would just end up with one track that contains all the instruments. This negates the benefit of multi-track recording. If when you listened to your recording back and say the drums were too loud, you couldn't just turn the drums down, because if you turned it down, you'd be turning everything down. But as I say, most of us record one track at a time in our home studios. So I might record some bass guitar, then record some guitar, then record some piano, then record some vocals. And all of that only really requires one input on the audio interface. But there are some other things that we do need to consider. So there are different types of inputs. There are XLR inputs, jack inputs, MIDI inputs, and it's important to know if an interface is advertised as having 4 inputs, that doesn't mean it's going to have 4 XLR inputs or 4 jack inputs. So you should always check that the interface provides the types of inputs that you need. So, for example, don't assume that just because an interface says it has 4 inputs that you'll be able to plug 4 microphones into it at the same time. For that, it would need to have 4 XLR inputs. If you're a keyboard player, you'll very likely want your audio interface to have a MIDI input, although it's not a deal breaker if it doesn't, because you can always buy a separate MIDI interface. Now, up to this point, we've only considered what inputs are strictly necessary, but there is another factor that might play into your decision, and that's convenience. For example, imagine you only have a 1 input interface. If you want to record some guitar, you plug your guitar into the input, record some guitar. You then want to record some vocals, so you take your guitar out, you plug your microphone in, you record some vocals. You then decide you want to record another guitar part, so you unplug the microphone, you plug your guitar back in, you play another guitar part, which is okay, but wouldn't it be nice if you could leave your microphone and your guitar permanently plugged in? So now, when you want to switch from recording vocals to guitar, there's no physical setup required. Everything's already connected. And obviously for that, you would need 2 inputs. One with your microphone plugged in and one with the jack cable from your guitar plugged in. And that's exactly what I do down here. There's an audio interface just out of shot. In one input, I've got my condenser microphone plugged in, and the other input, I've got a jack cable for a guitar. I also have my digital piano over there connected to the MIDI interface on my audio interface. Let's just talk just a little bit about phantom power. Some microphones, particularly condenser microphones, require what is known as phantom power. This is a 48 volt signal that's transmitted down the XLR cable to the microphone to power it. What this boils down to is if you have a microphone that requires phantom power, you need to get an audio interface that provides that feature. Now, this shouldn't be a problem because I think most audio interfaces do provide phantom power. If we look at this one here, you can see the little 48 volt button there. If I press that in, it's now sending that 48 volt signal down the XLR cable. And that's about it for audio interface inputs. Personally, I only require 3 inputs. I've got a microphone in one input for vocals and acoustic guitar recordings. I've got a jack cable in another input for electric guitar and bass recordings, and I've got my digital piano plugged into the MIDI interface for piano and keyboard recordings. And that's all I require. If you're interested, I'm using a 2nd gen Focusrite 6i6. One last thing to perhaps consider is potential future expansion. The number of inputs that you need may change as what you do in your home studio changes as you get more experience. For example, if currently you only ever record on your own, but in the future you think you may start recording with other people or just recording other people, maybe recording bands, then obviously if you're going to record a band all playing at the same time, the number of inputs that you require is going to drastically increase. Maybe you use entirely programmed drums at the moment, but sometime in the future you might want to get a drummer in and record a full drum kit. Again, that's going to need a lot of inputs because most likely you're going to have a microphone on the snare, another one on the bass drum, another one on the toms, and maybe overhead for the crash and ride cymbals, and maybe one on the hi-hat. So it's always worth, when you're purchasing an audio interface, taking what you think your future requirements will be into account. And this video has a companion article on homemusiccreator.com. This goes into more detail, particularly on live recordings and recording a full drum kit. Thanks for watching. This is Paul from Home Music Creator signing off. See you in the next video. Cheers.